Hey folks, thank you again for coming on to Back to Basics for Season 3. Today we're going to speak with Dan DeFigio, and we're going to find out what he's all about. But there's one topic that we are going to be talking about is sugar. How sweet is sugar? Is sugar good for you? Is it bad for you? Or is it just very little that we need to take? Well, that's what we're going to go and find out today on this call. Let's get on to Back to Basic and speak with Dan on Back to Basics. Hi, folks. Thank you again for coming to Back to Basics. As I said on the intro, today we're going to speak with Dan and we're going to find out what Dan is all about. But remember, what I did say on the intro is that we're going to talk about sweet or not sweet. That is the question, isn't it? Because let me tell you something. We always been told not to have sugar. Now the question is, too much, too less, or none at all? That is the question. And let's stop talking to me. Why don't we just go to Dan and let's get to know him better. Dan, how are you? Thanks for coming to Back to Basics.
Oh, thank you so much for asking me to come on your show, Girish. It's a fantastic podcast you're running. So it's an honor to be here.
Yeah, thank you again. Honor is actually all mine, but thank you again for that. But Dan, before we go to the details of sweet or no sweet, and that is the question for today, what does Back to Basic mean to you?
Well, my niche is nutrition coaching, as you know, and I deal a lot with emotional eating and stress eating and sugar addiction and things like that. So when it comes to getting back to basics, I really think that dumbing down emotional eating and dumbing down nutrition to very simple concepts is the best way to go about it, because you can spend a lifetime on the internet going through different diets and reading and listening to different videos from nutrition experts, and you're going to get 55,000 different answers to stuff. And a lot of it is conflicting and confusing. So I really try to keep things very simple with a couple basic principles for starters.
Yeah, thank you again. I totally agree with you because there are many answers and we don't know which answers to go with. But I think the main thing is, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think just go with your gut and go with your doctor, obviously, that which is the right step for you. What are your thoughts on that?
The first step that I think everybody should attempt to do is to make it your goal to be proactive instead of reactive when it comes to food. Regardless of what you decide to eat. Sometimes people are shocked that, I'm the guy who wrote Beating Sugar Addiction for Dummies, and sometimes I eat ice cream. And to some people, that is like shocking. And I am not the guy that tells people never to eat sugar and never to have junk food and never to have treats, because A, that's not realistic. And B, who would want to live like that?
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
No,
So
go ahead, please.
the real focus of what I'm trying to do with folks is to steer them away from being reactive with food, doing impulsive eating, emotional eating, stress response, all that kind of stuff. And when you can eat on purpose instead of reactively, that is the biggest part of the pyramid. That's the foundation of the pyramid right there, is eating on purpose instead of reactively. So if I had to dumb down my back to basics to any statement, it's going to be that: eat on purpose instead of reactively.
Awesome. Thank you again, Dan, for coming here, and thank you again for just supporting me on the small podcast that we have here.
Small pot, you're winning awards, aren't you?
Thank you again for that.
A heck of a job, man. Don't be so humble. This is a fantastic podcast.
Thank you again. So Dan, let me ask you this. The question that I asked on my intro and even just right now is sugar or no sugar, sweet and no sweet? Is that the concept for today? Or are we going to say, tone it down a little versus none at all?
I am definitely not a none at all person. Now, that being said, there are a handful of folks out there who really do best with total abstinence.
Mm,
And so if that is your bag, I'm not going to try to discourage you from that.
mm,
If you're an alcoholic and you know you cannot drink alcohol, then don't. I'm going to just say it that way.
mm,
However, I would say 90% of the people I talk to are not that person.
mm.
These are people who are able to work some treats and junk foods and sweets into their nutrition program, but you have to do it the right way. And
Mm,
that's really what I do when I coach people is I try to a put the fires out and get control over the situation. So the impulsiveness and the binge eating and the emotional reactivity, shooting yourself in the foot every day or two,
mm,
we get a handle on that.
mm.
And once we
Yeah,
stop the bleeding, then we can start deciding what to do when it comes to putting together a sensible nutrition program that includes some of your favorite foods.
of course, of course. Yeah, thank you again, Dan. We want to advise people to have sugar, not have sugar. They have to decide that. All what we're trying to do is to give as much information as we can, and then they'll decide at the end. So now the question that I have for you is, people, they don't know how to stop. They will keep on having sugar and sugar and sugar, or sodium, 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 but when do we stop, or do we just do in increments? I mean, is that the right approach, do you think?
I do increments, and I've had fantastic success with that for coming up on 30 years now. So I believe I'm doing something right.
Okay.
Um, as I said earlier, most people don't do well with all or nothing, trying to stop something cold turkey, because that really that relies on willpower.
Mm,
And willpower is a fickle friend and it doesn't usually last. So you have to come
mm,
up with a lot of tools to make that approach work. The
mm,
way that I like to do it is not, as you said, zero sugar,
mm,
because I don't think it's realistic.
mm.
Um, Everybody knows that sugar is not good for you. I never have to teach anyone that a mixed green salad is better for you than a box of donuts.
Okay.
Everybody knows this,
Okay.
but we don't always eat that way.
Right.
And the question is why? And that is where I come in. We start to investigate, why are you suffering from these impulses and emotional triggers? And why do you feel helpless to control how you're eating? Um, I am not, here's my disclaimer, Girish. I am not a mental health professional. I am not a psychologist or a doctor of psychiatry or a social worker or anything. I'm officially completely unqualified for everything. But like I said, I have 30 years behind me of a very good track record. So perhaps I'm on to something. Um,
Yeah, no, no, no. That's that we need everyone's opinion, because we need to help people when it comes to eating food, eating less, or whatever it is, right? So thank you again, Dan, because I your nuggets helps other people to flare out in the world to be a better person, and
that is why I do this every day.
yeah, yeah. Thank you again, Dan, for that. You know, Before we get to the next topic, let me just ask you this, and I've been hearing this for many, many years now. White sugar, white salt is not good, because I think the white material is not good. So is brown sugar good? Because
No,
that's not good
no,
either,
listen.
right?
Brown sugar is just regular sugar that has a little bit of something else in it, like a molasses or something like that. So it may technically have a smidgen of nutrients due to what they add to it, but
Mm,
it's sugar. So
mm.
so it's
So
it's the same. You may treat it as the same thing.
yeah, yeah, and thank you again for that. So you got white sugar, you got brown sugar, then you got raw sugar, then you got stevia and all that. The sweet and low. I mean, can you explain why should we have those and why should we not have those?
Certainly, yeah, I'd be happy to. So sugar as a substance is bad for us in all but the very smallest amounts.
Mm,
Because I don't want to bore everybody with too much physiology, but basically what happens is sugar damages your tissues.
mm,
So you end up long term with eating too much sugar. with these things called advanced glycated end products, which is a really nerdy way. It's a really nerdy name for just like clumps of protein.
Mm,
So these can cause damage to tissues like your blood vessels and your skin and your organs. Actually, too much sugar actually starts to um, cause, especially the fructose sugar, starts to cause fat deposits around the liver. In
mm,
fact, that's sugar abuse is the number one cause of fatty liver disease that is not caused from alcohol.
mm,
So I'm not going to go through all the giant list of things that processed sugar is harming you in your body. But you asked about some of the artificial sweeteners and the natural sweeteners, and I do want to touch on that so people understand. So we understand what real sugar is, and we know that that's not good for us. So we want to minimize that whenever we can. There is you mentioned stevia, and that is a plant that people use as a sweetener, and that appears to be just fine. There aren't any negative side effects to that, and it's basically a powdered plant. You can buy it as a powder, and you just sprinkle it like you would sprinkle sugar, and it
mm,
doesn't have the effect on your blood sugar levels. It doesn't have calories really, and it acts as a sweetener, and it seems to be fine. So
mm,
whole stevia is fine. There's a product called Truvia, which is made from stevia, but they actually extract some of the chemicals from stevia in that particular product. So it's not real stevia, it's not whole stevia. So
mm,
you'll find if you read any of my material that I'm a big proponent of like whole foods versus processed foods. So
mm,
if you're going to use stevia, use whole stevia, whole
mm,
organic stevia, and that is a fine sweetener. And
mm,
then you asked about sweet and low and chemical sweeteners. Those have a host of problems,
mm,
especially aspartame, which
mm,
is NutraSweet. If you look in, I actually wrote about this in Beating Sugar Addiction for Dummies, which is my flagship book. There's a big
mm,
piece on artificial sweeteners in there. And once again, I'm not going to bore everybody with the physiology of how the chemical sweeteners work, but basically they overexcite your neurons to the point where they die. So you literally get get neuron damage, you get brain damage from aspartame, NutraSweet. So stay
mm.
away from that stuff whenever you can. If you have to have something sweet, I'd actually prefer that people have like real food that is sweet as opposed to chemical sweeteners, because those things cause some problems, especially in large amounts.
Mm. Yeah, thank you again. But the people they usually take sweet and and they take water after that. Now, is that good? Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, where my science is kind of bad too, but if you take sugar and you put water, I think it gets hardened, doesn't it? So is that good, or should we drink warm water? Because that
I
loops
don't
it
think,
out.
yeah, it doesn't really matter because you digest sugar. Sugar breaks down, and all carbohydrates break down into glucose in our digestion. And
Mm,
the thing that makes it better for you or less good for you is how fast it breaks down and how fast it enters the bloodstream. So, one of the
mm,
reasons that processed sugar is so bad for us is because it contains no nutrients and it breaks down very quickly in the bloodstream. So, we get this big spike of blood sugar rising. And
mm.
that creates a lot of problems. So, as far as whether you're drinking water that is warm or cold, that doesn't really affect the sugar intake.
Mm. Yeah, thank you so much, Dan, for explaining that and not in too much detail, but we did talk about in basic, and hopefully people will understand that, and I understood it. So thank you again for that. You mentioned about certain tools to use. Are we talking software tools, or are we talking system tools and schedules and routines that people should follow? So what are your thoughts on that?
The best tool that you can use if you want to improve your nutrition, write this down if you're taking notes, is a food journal, a planning sheet. I have everybody that I work with, for starters, just record what you're eating for 2 or 3 days, because that is your reality check. First of all, you have to see what you're doing first before we can make any changes. We got to see what we're working with. So most people are surprised when they start writing it down, because most people think that they're doing better than they are. And we look at the food journal and it's like, oh, hey, look, you haven't had a vegetable since Tuesday. So we need to talk about that. And secondly, when you have to write down what you're doing, you're being more intentional about what you're doing.
Hmm.
Everybody reports to me that just by virtue of the fact that they have to write down what they're going to eat, it
Hmm.
automatically improves what they decide to do.
Hmm. Hmm.
So when I get the food journal from someone after 2 or 3 days, it's already an upgraded version of what they were doing.
Of
So
course.
we're already making progress just by being intentional about doing a reality check.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
thank you again, Dan. And is there any other tool, or that's it?
the food journal is number one tool, and the equal tied for first place is the meal plan.
Hmm.
Planning your food in advance is key. If you don't plan your food, then you're going to be at the mercy of whatever you can find lying around. You're probably going to get too hungry. You should not ask your starving brain to choose between spinach and ice cream,
Hmm.
you know? So when you plan your food in advance, you know what you're going to eat. You have it
Right.
prepared in advance. So you don't have to think about it, and you don't have to make any split second decisions when you're not thinking straight, or when you're having sugar cravings or emotional eating urges.
Mm. Yeah, Dan, thank you again for explaining the tools part, because I think most of the people that I know, they're already doing one part of it, not the other part. So I won't tell you which one. We'll talk about that offline. But thank you again for explaining that. So before we go to the next segment, there is a new segment that we added on season 3, which is the rapid fire round. In this rapid fire round, I'll ask you some few words or sentences, whatever pops in your head. We'll just go from there. Are you
I
game?
like it. I'm
You
excited about this.
okay? You game with that?
I'm a little nervous, but I'm ready.
No, don't be nervous. I only break people down.
So
Okay.
just a word or two, or a small or a quick phrase, right? Rapid fire.
Whatever it is. Yes, exactly. Whatever, but not too long. Sure.
Okay.
So the first word is going to be lifetime.
Intentional eating.
Okay. Proactive.
Also intentional eating. Hey, this is easy.
Reactive.
Oh, hurtful.
Increments.
Baby steps are the best way to make progress.
Hmm. Sugar, white sugar versus brown sugar. Which one do you choose?
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Stay away from
Okay.
both of them.
Okay. Uh, Tissue.
Muscles.
Okay. Too much of protein.
Too much protein can be a problem, but you have to eat a lot of protein for a long time for it to be a real problem, unless you've got a kidney issue and that you're a special case. But for your average person, um, all the red flags that you'll sometimes read about the dangers of a little bit too much protein are really overblown. Too much protein is not that big of a deal.
Hmm. Addiction.
Addiction, a rapid fire summary of addiction. Reactive behavior, using a substance as a coping mechanism so you can try to achieve a certain emotional state.
Okay. Fat liver.
Fatty liver, very dangerous, easily preventable.
Okay. Neurons.
Do you have a word cloud from our previous conversation? Is that where the rapid fire is coming from? This is fun. I like it. Yeah, the neurons can get damaged from the chemical sweeteners. So take care of your brain. We need it, hopefully for a really long time.
Okay. The next word is going to be dummies.
Dummies. Everyone should have at least 2 copies of Beating Sugar Addiction for Dummies.
Okay. The next one is going to be Cocaine Bear.
The cocaine bear. Yes. Um, people can uh, people can become out of their mind animals with their own behavior, just like cocaine bear.
Okay. Okay. The next two is going to be Dan is one of them.
Okay.
Dan.
Oh, Dan is the word.
Dan is the word.
Dan is the word. Okay. Um, Dan is a guy who is trying his best to help people become their best.
Okay. And the last word is back to basics.
Getting back to basics is the key to success. Not only is it the greatest podcast ever, but it is the main way to achieve pretty much anything that you want to achieve. Because if you overcomplicate it, you're going to get lost in the details.
That is so true, isn't it? Thank you. Thank you so much, Dan, for playing and being a sport on the rapid fire round.
It was fun.
Uh,
You almost
Hopefully,
had
I
me
didn't
with
challenge you
cocaine bear.
enough.
Say again?
Yeah. No, I said I hope I didn't challenge you enough.
No, it's great. This is fun.
Awesome, awesome. So Dan, let me ask you this. Besides, we're going to talk a little about your book also, as what that whole thing is about, and it's a great story, by the way. Uh, but is there a book or a movie or music that it kind of relates with you that you listen quite often,
A movie or music that I
or a
listen
book?
to often, or a book that I read often. Gosh, I read a lot of things. So, do one of the best things that I've read recently has nothing to do with nutrition. I'm
That's
a
fine.
real nature nerd, and there is a forester in Germany named Peter Wohlleben, and he has a best-selling book that is called The Hidden Life of Trees,
Hmm.
and I adored it. So,
Hmm.
just as an aside, even though it doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about, um, that's probably the best book that I've read in the last couple months.
Oh, awesome, awesome. Thank you again. We actually wanted to understand, what is Dan all about, even without sugar and without health, and if he's a really fun guy to hang out with. So thank you again for explaining that. But Dan, let me ask you this here. Um, the book that you have, okay, it's all about dummies, isn't it? But how did you start this whole process? Because um, starting this whole process, I think there had to be something that you got into this realm of sugar and no sugar bubble that you just came in.
Yeah, I started helping people with exercise and nutrition in 1993. So I'm 127 years old right now. And one of the things that became apparent to me very early in that process was that emotional eating and sugar cravings and sugar addiction were big problems for a lot of people.
Hmm.
So I started doing some work with that, coming up with some methodologies to help people, coming up with some programs and steps for them to go by. And
Hmm.
in the 1990s, in the mid 1990s, I was an early adopter to the internet. I was writing a
Hmm.
lot. I was publishing articles online. I was doing interviews and pieces for magazines and things like that. And then one day, out of the blue, the publishers who do the Dummies books just called me up and they said, "We love your stuff. We want you to do a book for us," which I
Hmm.
thought was awesome. So we batted around a couple of ideas, and that is how Beating Sugar Addiction for Dummies was born.
Nice, awesome, Dan. I've learned a lot from the Dummies book, and this is another Dummies book that you are forcing me to go and buy. Okay, so thank you again for explaining what you have done, because it seems like that's a new progress of your life. Is that right approach? Do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I would say probably in the last 10 years. which for some folks who aren't very old, that might seem like a really long time. But in the
Yeah.
last 10 years of my 30-year career, that's really sort of dialed in my niche of
Mm,
emotional eating and sugar addiction and helping people with these types of reactive eating problems.
mm. Yeah, Dan, thank you again, and thank you again for explaining all the stuff when it comes to sugar and all the fattening stuff, no fattening stuff, and all the dummy stuff and no dummy stuff. But thank you again for being a sport on coming to Back to Basics. But before you leave, do you have any last words to all my Back to Basic listeners? And how is your journey on Back to Basics too? On top of that,
If I were to leave the listeners with one important concept, besides being intentional, which is the overarching one, I would like to throw this out to everybody. So write these down. When we have emotional eating urges and stress eating responses, sugar addiction, this is all a version of emotional eating. And the reason that we do this is generally one of two reasons. Reason number one is we are using food as a substitute for something that we want emotionally. It's not always food, actually. Plenty of people use alcohol or drugs or gambling or sex or whatever your thing is. So we use something as a substitute for what we really want emotionally. As an example, I use this in a lot of interviews. This is a really common thing that I hear from people. As a stress eating response, if they're having a terrible day at work, they hadn't slept well, they're exhausted, they're super stressed out at work, there's deadlines, their boss is yelling at them, the kid's homesick at work, is sick at home, and you're just having a terrible day at work. And so the stress eating response is, I'm going to eat these donuts. When you're having a day like that, and you're in a moment where you're getting this urge to eat the donuts, what you really most likely want in that situation is some sort of a feeling of peacefulness or being in control. When life seems out of control and we get overwhelmed, that is a very uncomfortable situation. So we pretend that eating the donuts is going to make us peaceful or it's going
mm,
to give us the control that we want.
yeah, yeah.
So that's a great example of bucket number one of emotional eating, which is the emotional substitute.
Well, actually, that's true, isn't it? Because a lot of people, when they get depressed or even happy, they just keep on having ice creams, right? I mean, donut is just one thing, but there's many, many more examples that we can give, and we can just go on and on about this. But I think there's a want and a need. I think that's where people they need to stop a little, or maybe do increments of what they need to do. And you have explained that well. So, Dan, thank you again for coming here and sharing all the small nuggets that you have shared about sugar and no sugar, or little sugar for that matter. But thank you again for coming here.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me to come on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again. So, guys, we spoke with Dan today, didn't we? And we talked about the basics of, well, what did we talk about? We actually talked about many different things. We talked about what we are eating, not eating, what we are incrementing. I mean, it's all about balancing food out. I mean, that's all there is. I mean, if you want to take sodium, you want to take sugar, you want to take steak, you want to take fish, whatever it is, take it in increments, because I think that's the key. Every show that I've done so far, when it comes to health, they always say one thing: you can have as much as you want, but do it in increments, because I think that's the key. Too much of everything is not good either. Too much of spinach is not good, because it goes bad, doesn't it? Because you might get diarrhea. Have you thought of that? So remember, everything goes back to basics, and that's what we did today. But here's a quote for the day from Back to Basics, and hopefully my guest will like that. The quote is, lower your sugar if you too sweet. Lower your sugar if you're too sweet. What does that mean? It means zero, less, whatever. That's up to you to decide. But my job is to go and give you as much information as I can when it comes to health, when it comes to back to basic mode health. So, guys, thank you again. And remember, what do we always say at the end of the episode? Everything in life goes back to basics, and that's what we did today, guys. Guys, we got only 8 episodes left till we're done with the season for Back to Basic Mode Health. Give me love and support and reviews for the show just to make me stronger. Thank you guys. I will see you next time on Back to Basics. How was that?
You are very well spoken.
Thank you. Thank you.
I didn't know we were just going to do 30 minutes. I could have tightened things up a little bit. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Hi guys, thank you again for tuning in to Back to Basics and listening to the excellent episode that we had today with our guest. You know, with your love and support, we do need you to at least rate our show, review our show, because it does make us stronger day by day, week by week, as I usually say on my episodes. And there are 3 things in this episode that it makes a hit for me, which is the content, the guest, and definitely the host. So guys, take care, God bless, and remember, everything in life goes back to basics, and that's what we did today, guys. Guys, take care, God bless, and see you next time on Back to Basics.